Those who have been to a ruined wedding. What happened? I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilt on wedding dresses. The lot. The one I'll never forget, an all-day do. Small ceremony, a few close friends and family, and a big reception filled with a huge buffet. Every type of food you could imagine. And a free bar. All in the same venue. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests. But 30 guests turned up. At most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive beautiful converted barn. Loads of food and drinks. Great music but no guests. At about 10 PM the venue was licensed until 11 PM. The buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the unshade food so the new couple could take it home. And her response of "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming," was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance about 10:30 PM and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I have ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 PM, the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day and the happy couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a shit about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. My wife's grandfather slipped downstairs 2 days before our wedding. We got told it was a very bruised ankle, but he couldn't make it. That developed the day after into ongoing hospitalization for observation. We didn't question it. He was 81. We went on honeymoon the day after that. On day 4 of the honeymoon he passed away. Despite asking to be updated, we didn't get told until our return. Turns out the fall down the stairs was real. So was the bruised ankle. It's just that my mother-in-law, it was her dad, deliberately didn't mention the significant internal injuries. Gordon left a good legacy: the wooden chair leg on Henry VIII's statue above the gate to Trinity College in Cambridge. He was one of the students that made it happen. The story in the student newspaper Varsity that a cleaner put it there isn't true. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods on a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going, and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of, set up, etc. So, you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea, there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, there were none. I somehow whipped up impromptu everything for the missing things. And just as the bride and groom are arriving, we blow the fuse for our only power source and the place is plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker. I move some stuff around. Blow the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening. Through speeches, first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses, the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said forget about it. We'll take them back dirty in the crew, and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing them. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. When I was 6 or 7 I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me. So much sugar everywhere. Basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom. Passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying. And everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later. Despite what happened that day. I went to one where the reception was in a field with a marquee. I didn't know anyone, because I was a one. The cake melted and fell over before the married couple arrived. Wasps got into and died in the pins that was to be offered out. A bridesmaid got stung. I later bonded with a stranger over fear of spiders when some ran across the table. We were packed in tight. Couldn't escape and made a scene. The generator broke down after sunset, so the lighting cut out and music stopped. Someone played music on their phone, and we lit candles. The couple actually took it all in their stride and didn't let it bother them. One of the most fun weddings I've been to. The mother of the groom was an alcoholic for many years. She decided to quit drinking cold turkey a few days before his wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital via ambulance. Alcohol withdrawal is no joke. Was she alright? It's one of the few withdrawals you can actually die from. Other drug withdrawals you may want to die from, but alcohol might actually kill you. The reason is that, since it's such a depressant, the brain of someone with long-term alcoholism compensates by lowering the electrical threshold that it needs to respond to stimuli. However, after a few days of not having alcohol, the threshold is still down. But now the brain is firing electrical signals at the normal strength. That's what causes the seizures. Too much electrical activity in the brain. Without medical intervention, the brain can keep seizing until death occurs. This is why hospitals used to keep beer in stock. But nowadays we use Ativan or another chemical depressant to taper the patient down safely, that is detox. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. It was a big wedding. Over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. Was a guest of friend of the bride. Did not know anyone attending. Very expensive, over-the-top place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honor grabs mic at the cocktail hour, begins her speech. Rambling. Drunk. Quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She is tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone. And much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He took copies. One edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is a stuff of legend. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500 plus feet. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. Last minute her mom asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply did not follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently all her life she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset. So she went ahead down the aisle, while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror amusement of the crowd. 4 years after, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Is this the guy who ducked up my wedding? How are ya?" I can't tell how joking serious the last question is, but I think it should go something more like this: is this the guy who's not a professional DJ, who we didn't pay, who we handed music instructions to at the last minute, who told us he didn't quite understand what we wanted, and who we didn't bother to give exact, clear instructions to once he told us that? How are ya? If he's serious, he's an asshole. If he's joking, he's got a good sense of humor. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently, the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. Reception went on as planned. She got wasted, and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, my then girlfriend, multiple times each. Ended up getting punched out by his son and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. Edit half the questions are the same. And the answer is yes. He groped his own daughter, as well as his son's wife. Edit 2 dude was belligerently drunk, had been punched, and if memory serves correct, had his hands duct taped behind his back. That's how he was able to be locked in a minivan. Child locks on the rear, and too drunk to find a way to hit the unlock in the front seats while his hands were taped. It was an uncle that pulled this at one wedding I attended. He got grabby with the bride's mother and the maid of honor, at which point he was told to go sit at his ducking table and stay there or there would be trouble. He didn't listen and tried grabbing the bride's ass, at which point he was punched and frog marched out into the parking lot by the groom and locked in the back of his own pickup truck with a bloody nose. Not as dramatic as some of the comments on here, but very awkward. Was at a lovely wedding. Really romantic. All candle lit. And the reception was lovely. Best man made a good speech, then at the end he said everybody raise your glasses to. He said the groom's name, then accidentally called the new bride the ex-wife's name of the groom. I kinda ruined a moment in a wedding like 7 or 8 years ago. The bride was my GF's friend. It was a really cool venue. Green and lush. High on a hill overlooking the ocean. Everything went really good until sometime in the evening. Other friends, artsy, bohemian people of the bride, wanted to release lots of Japanese floating lanterns. You know, those paper ones where you put in a tea candle and release them to get carried away by the breeze. It was midsummer, right in the wildfire season. In fact, the glow and smoke from a nearby fire over the next hill were in sight, and the wind was blowing from the sea into the land. By that point I probably had some drinks in me, and I didn't realize I was ruining the moment until later. I just pointed out that I didn't think it was a good idea to release lots of candles in the air when there were people fighting a raging fire a few kilometers away, and for a brief moment I felt myself at the center of a group of like 20 people silently staring dead at me, bride and groom included. Thankfully, they had lots of other activities planned, and we went on to the next one. It's one of those rare situations of life that I feel proud and mortified of at the same time. As for the couple, I hear they are divorcing now. Sad. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids. So they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated a knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, etc. But she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced, etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Not me, but my elder cousin's story. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom got scammed by the wedding organizer 1 hour before the wedding event. Nothing there in the room. No food, no decorations. Just few tables, and basically it feels like unused ballroom. The bride and groom realized the wedding organizer scammed them, and the wedding organizer took the money to bought themselves a big ol' house. When the bride and groom decide to see the wedding organizer, they caught him sleeping in his house. It became a national TV news here, and the wedding organizer got sued by few brides and grooms that got scammed by them too. This sort of happened to my parents. The wedding organizer was double booking venues, and they caught the guy few months before the wedding. The venue offered to pay for a new venue as an apology, so my parents were married in a brand new hotel. They wore hard hats to see it initially and prayed construction would be done in time. It worked out well though. The hotel upgraded their dinner menu for being the first event and threw in a complimentary dessert table. I was in the wedding party and the bride's family are a little bit country. Not that there's anything wrong with that. For the entire weekend they were the most fun. The wedding was outdoors at the groom's family's country club. The brother of the bride gave her away. He was plastered before 10 AM, and during the vows he decided he couldn't wait until the ceremony was over to relieve himself. He thought he was ducking behind the mountain of flowers at the altar, but didn't go far enough. My favorite wedding photo is the bride saying her vows laughing, and in the background is her brother's bare butt cheeks as he's relieving himself. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners, so they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. Edit bonus story, because even though it didn't ruin the wedding for the couple, it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid for my friend. Flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there. Had to do the setup of the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it, etc. etc. The whole time she's rude and tells everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids aren't helping. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backwards trying to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful she instead told her sister, I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead. She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes, because I had been ill, but didn't think much of it. At the reception her new husband takes the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me, we are so glad you fit into your dress, in front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore and neither does her maid of honor or other bridesmaid. I worked on a tropical island off the coast of Queensland, Australia. Loads of weddings happened there. Most days there'd be one or two. One day this groom's party comes through my bar. They're on the Bucks party thing before the wedding the next day. They're pretty drunk at 4 PM. I figured they started early and would finish early given they have a sunrise ceremony. Worst idea in the world. For your information. About an hour later they've left and gone to another bar on the island. Then the bride's party comes through. Equally shit-faced. I finished work at 9 PM then came back 3 hours later to work in the nightclub. I get in at midnight. Start pouring drinks. It's busy as duck with like 250 people in the club. Around 1 AM the groom and bride parties roll in absolutely destroyed. They look disgustingly drunk. I've no idea why security let them in, because I wasn't serving them. They left about 45 minutes later, so, roughly, they'd arrived back at their hotel rooms around 2 AM with the expectation that the bride and her party need to be up at 4 AM for hair and makeup to be done in time for a 715 AM ceremony. They all decide we'll just stay up all night and keep drinking until the wedding. At this stage they had to have been drinking for 18 hours. Anyway, ceremony time rolls around. She can't walk down the aisle, which is on the beach, in her heels, so she tosses them off. Groom and all their friends are drunk as duck and can barely stand. They try to say their vows, but the celebrant can't understand them, so she isn't legally allowed to marry them because they are too drunk to consent to marriage. Whole wedding is canned. A simple wedding, like the one they had. For the wedding party and 20 guests cost $35,000. So they wasted all that money to be told, sorry, you're drunk. I cannot legally marry you. Edit. Being that quite a few people have said this sounds like a fun way to spend your wedding. So what if you didn't get legally married? Just have the reception and sort it out later. They did have the reception. From what I was told, the bride passed out about an hour in. The groom threw up everywhere. The mothers of the bride and groom were hysterically crying and incredibly upset with their kids. But, for the guests who weren't that wasted or crying, they had a great time. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.